everyone. I'm back again. I'm sorry to have been gone for so long, but I'm back with a new watercolor demo today. Today I'll be painting this young lady you see in the upper right hand corner. This is a photo I took from, it was part of a photo shoot that I took for an illustration I did for an ad campaign a few years back. So I picked a different photo that I didn't use before and thought it'd be fun to do a portrait from this photo. So here we go. I'm starting to draw in the basic shapes, trying to make sure I get the angle of her head in there. I've drawn a line across where her eyes will be, and I generally draw a center line as well down the middle of the face to where the nose and the middle of the mouth is and that kind of thing. I'm not sure why I didn't do it this time. But you'll see me kind of chiseling away from larger shapes down to smaller shapes, and that's the way you want to approach drawing for the most part. You want to work as if you're working almost on a sculpture, like you're sculpting something out of a block of marble. You want to work from big to small, work on the larger masses, and once those are proportionately where they should be in relation to each other, then you can start working on some of the smaller details. You also want to think of things in terms of being real forms. When you're looking at a 2D photo, you want to be thinking about the roundness of things like the cheek or the chin, um, areas like that, and really think about those objects in your mind and how they actually sit in space, rather than just translating a 2D object from the photo over to another 2D plane, which would be your paper. So it's good to think in those terms as you're drawing. Think about the eyes as being orbs. Think about the nose, in this case, being almost like a box shape a little bit. Today I've included a photo the photo that I'm working from of the model, so you can kind of see what I'm looking at as I'm drawing and painting, and it should help you understand um, why I'm making the decisions that I'm making if you're seeing the same reference that I'm working from. Now you'll notice I'm having a little trouble with that right side of her face, the side that's in shadow, getting it to be the right width and distance away from her mouth. She's got that shock of hair hanging down in front of that side of her face, and it made it a little difficult to gauge just where that cheek should be under there, but I think I kind of got it squared away. This likeness isn't 100% for sure, but I'm trying to get the proportions in there correctly. And that about does it for the drawing portion of this. I think there's enough information here for me to start painting, although I will change things as you'll see later. I'm also going to use a tiny bit of masking fluid to mask out a couple of highlights in her eye and on her nose. You want to shake this stuff up real good. You also want to use some soap or brush cleaner on your brush to kind of protect the brush from the kind of liquid rubber that the masking fluid is. And use a junk brush. Don't use your good brushes with this stuff because it will eventually ruin them. This is just a cheap little synthetic brush that I have. So I'm coating it with a little soap, shaking up the masking fluid, and then just getting a little dab of that on my brush with that brush cleaner soap on there to help protect it from just totally sticking to the bristles. So I'm dabbing just a little tiny bit for a couple of little highlights in her eye and on her nose. What this stuff does is it provides a little barrier. You let it dry and it will stay white under there as you paint on top of it, and then you can rub it off later. You always want to make sure you clean even your junk brush real good once you've used this stuff, because it will get in the bristles and ruin even a cheap brush. I'm also using a new palette today. I always seem to have a new palette, but this was a gift from my buddy Jared Cullum from the Jared Loves to Draw channel. He handmade this for me out of nickel silver when he was making a few of these for fun last year. Has a great little handle on it for opening the flap there. Since this is nickel silver, it will never rust, which is awesome. It has a little removable tray there that you can put on your table and then use more space in the palette. So that's a fantastic feature. I just love this thing. It's built like a tank. I'll be using it as my primary palette quite a bit. This is a quick view of how I have my studio table set up, just so you can kind of see the way I'm working. I would move things out for larger paintings, but for this little small painting, you can kind of see how I have things set up. I'm beginning the painting portion of this by spraying down my palette and moistening everything up. I'm mixing up a little yellow ochre and a little bit of carmine there as kind of a mid-tone for starting to put in the shadows on her face. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm kind of looking at the reference and figuring out where those mid-tone shadows are, and also keeping in mind that the value of this is going to be much lighter as it dries. And that's a tough thing to gauge sometimes working in watercolor, trying to figure out just how light something's going to be once it does dry. And it's something I struggle with all the time. And I've been painting for 30 years and I have a better handle on it, but it's still a little bit of a guessing game, just how light your colors are going to end up once they're dry. Going back in with some clean water just to kind of soften some of those edges, leave some of them sharp, soften some of them. I'm going back in with a little bit of pretty much pure yellow ochre to kind of hit those yellowy golden tones in her hair. A little more of my mid-tone fleshy mixture there for the shadow side of her arm and shoulder. And I dropped a little blue in there because I knew that shadow is pretty cool in the temperature sense. once I finish that arm, it'll be cooler there. So now I'm going back in and I've warmed up my mixture a little bit, and I'm going in and I'm hitting what I know is going to be probably some of the lightest tones apart from the white paper that I'm leaving in her hair and on the side of her face there, kind of towards the middle of the painting. So I've added a little ultramarine blue to my mixture there, my fleshy mixture, my reddish mixture, and starting to put in some of the darks on her hair just to help me gauge how things are going. And for the most part, I'm trying to work on this painting as a whole instead of working on specific areas. I'm trying to bring it to completion together as a whole piece. So I'm going in and putting a little bit of cool gray, I did in her eye there, and I'm mixing up a little bit of mostly carmine to hit the dark areas of her lips there. And then I hit that same mixture with some, I think it was Payne's Gray or something like that, to get a dark, to get those nostrils in, and looks like mostly Payne's Gray to kind of work on the dark shape that's next to her neck and her chin there in her hair. And basically doing that just to get some value relationships going so I can have a better handle on how dark things should be in the face. I should probably mention the materials I'm using on this painting. You probably noticed that I was using a Arches cold press watercolor block. It's 9 by 12. I'm also using Daniel Smith paints. That's what I have this palette loaded with. And the brushes I'm using are made by Escoda. They are the Versatile, that's the brand name, Versatile. Brushes. They are synthetic. They hold great points and they hold plenty of water. And they've got good snap, so I like them a lot. Okay, I'm starting to put in some of those darker tones that are around her eye and along the side of her nose. There's a pretty strong dark shadow there, and then also on the shadow side of her nose there's lots of darks, so I'm putting those in now. I'm starting to put in more dark in that area to define the edge of her neck and face. You'll notice that I don't do a lot of wet and wet painting. I tend to put down a shape and then grab some clean water and then work the shape from there. And that's not a hard and fast rule for me, but in a portrait like this, I tend to do more of that kind of thing. I'm putting in some of the darks in the hair up there on the side of her part. I don't like all the strokes, so you saw me go in with a paper towel and get rid of some of those. More darks along the side of her face to separate where her face and her hair are. I'm not trying to be exact with everything. I'm not trying to match everything exactly. I'm just trying to kind of give the feel of the way, for instance, that the hair turns and hits the light, or turns away from the light. You may notice I'm having to hit some areas and shadows 2 or 3 times, and that's par for the course with watercolor, but it's also kind of a result of not hitting those values deep enough the first time, like I was talking about earlier, where I just wasn't sure how dark those values were going to dry when they were done. So you'll see me going back and hitting certain shadows in areas 2 or 3 times to get them as dark and as rich as I would like them to be. Starting to try and get some detail into that eye in the light side of her face, defining the edge of the eyelid and the pupil, things like that. Now I'm removing the masking fluid with a rubber cement remover. You could use your finger or an eraser. And I'm going back in and detailing around that highlight in the eye. A lot of times they need to be made a little smaller or whatever. Now I'm really darkening that shadow side of her hair and being careful to leave some of the wisps of hair that kind of overhang the shadow section to kind of give the hair a layering effect and a look of having dimension and different levels in it. She has a necklace on, and I'm putting that in very loosely and without much detail or anything. I just want the suggestion that it's there instead of being something that draws the eye. Here I'm putting in the shadow side of her arm and elbow, putting a little Payne's gray in there to deepen the shadow at the top. I don't want this to be overly detailed, kind of like the necklace. I don't want it to compete with her features in her face for attention. So I'm leaving it a little abstract and loose and frankly a little questionable. But I just let it kind of stand where it is, putting in a little bit of hair back there just to suggest that it's coming over her shoulder there. I've decided to put in a background mainly to add interest and to help the light areas on her face pop out more. I'm using kind of a watered down Payne's gray, which kind of seems to be my go-to cool dark. So I'm putting that in around her hair and just grabbing a little, you can see I grabbed a little bit of that warm red mixture and just kind of dropped some of that in for just a little change of color, little interest, little color interest back in the background. Careful not to be too clean about it, leaving little gaps of white paper, which always kind of adds a little interest. But you don't want it to have too much interest or it'll start to detract from your main subject. Now, since I put the background in, it's kind of giving her kind of a cutout look. So what I'm doing is I'm going back in and I'm pushing some of those shadow areas on the edges of her hair so they will blend with the background a little bit better. Here I'm adding a couple of dabs of white gouache straight out of the tube. My masking fluid little mark wasn't quite enough, so I went back in with some white gouache. Here I am strengthening. She really needed the darker, well, the mid-tone shadows darkened for more contrast against the light areas of her face. So I'm going in and darkening all of those areas. Careful to soften edges where it needs to be softened, that type of thing. And I noticed that her hair was could maybe have come a little further forward, so I'm putting in a thicker shadow on that side to kind of give the illusion of more hair over on that side. Just a few little details here and there. I noticed some issues after letting this sit for a while. One was the angle of her eye is off. It needs to be pointed down towards her nose more. So I'm kind of cheating it a little bit, trying to darken the detail in the corner of her eye a little bit lower, and then hitting the top left of her eye more to try to give the illusion of more of an angle to that eye. And I also noticed that her chin was far too short. There wasn't enough chin under her lips. So I'm going in, I'm putting clean water over that dark area. It doesn't look clean once I'm starting to move that paint around. And then I dab it with a paper towel, and that removes some of the paint. So then I can go back in and make that line to give her a little bit more of a chin. I don't know how well it works. It's not ideal to have to do something like that, but there it is. So, and you can see the effects of it there. I don't know if it's something you'd notice looking at the painting without having seen the correction. I'm going in and trying to fill in some of that color in that correction. Let's see, just a little more eye detail. You know, I'm seeing proportion problems in this, but that's one of the things with watercolor is there's not a lot. There, I'm strengthening that line under her chin there a little bit. With watercolor, there's not a lot you can do to fix things. Since it's a transparent medium, you can do little things like I just tried to do there. But overall, if you find major proportion problems, it's usually a matter of starting over. So thanks for watching this. I appreciate everyone watching, and I hope everyone is warm and doing well. I will see you next time. Take care.